Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mic, setting up week 9, the final week of the regular season in OUA action. And Tom, my oh my, we do this every single year. We get here, we say, where did the season go? And it feels like yesterday. You know what? This year more than others, though, I'm forward looking right now because we have some major matchups in this week, and I can't wait for the playoffs to start. We're gonna go through these games as we always do. We're gonna make our picks, and we're gonna go back to the playoff predictions because there's some wild stuff that came to our eyes and that we're gonna play around with. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm good. For the folks who are not watching our YouTube right now, I'm sure that you can see the smoke coming out of my ears after Zach and I just sat down and walked through all of the potential scenarios for the playoffs here. So if I'm a little slow or behind, forgive me. I'm still trying to recalibrate myself to get back into this, but I think we've got everything figured out, even the insanity of the insanity.
Tom, I'll set you up to give this shout out because it was brought to your attention through another account that does some really cool U Sports content. That despite the scenarios that we went over a week ago, setting up week 8, it was brought to our attention that Ottawa has well, there's a pathway in which Ottawa doesn't make the playoffs, which we didn't account for. We worked it through where we now understand that, thanks to the kind folks at
Obsessed Sports, or on Instagram, ob.cestsports. Shout out to them. They are also the people who are responsible for the U Sports Fantasy. In case you haven't seen that, they do have their own app where you can go in and pick your own fantasy players. We have not actually collaborated with them. We're a fan of anybody who is promoting U Sports football in general. So shout out to Obsessed Sports, and if you have a time, go check them out on Instagram. They are outstanding at what they do.
I love it, man. And speaking of the Ottawa GGs, I think we're going to start there with our week 9 breakdowns. All these games are at 1 o'clock, which is a bit of a bummer, but we're used to that by now. It's Ottawa coming off the bye week, following up that super exciting Panda game victory against Carleton, where they are hosting the U of T Blues. And Tom, this is a matchup right now that, again, a week ago we're taking a peek into the week 9 schedule and saying this game has no meaning whatsoever. And we'll do the breakdown when we finish all the games. But this, like, not that I'm gonna pick Ottawa in this game off the bye at home against U of T with how they've been looking, but yeah, Ottawa needs to win this game, or I think is it confirmed? Is that the process that if they lose this, some other things have to happen, but this is a major step in a pathway for them not to get in the playoffs.
Yep. This one boils down nice and easy. If you win, you're in no matter what. However, if Ottawa loses and a couple of other teams lose as well, then there's a scenario where Ottawa could go from sitting in 6th right now all the way down to 9th in the OUA. So massive implications there. Ottawa needs to take care of business. And if they do, they avoid all of this. But we will break down all of that insanity near the end of the pod.
Yeah, and with the way Ottawa's been playing, again, going into the bye, they're looking really sharp. And we go back first and foremost to that Windsor game where we saw Josh Jansen take the reins from Bam Miracle. Again, going back now about 3 weeks' time in Windsor, he goes 16 for 19, a touchdown, 1 interception. And again, he has that drive to be able to give them the opportunity to take the lead in the waning seconds. Then in the Panda game, Josh Jansen goes 23 for 30, 1 touchdown, throws 295 yards. Charles Aslan, our king, Charles Aslan gets 2 touchdowns. And then been starting to see offensively, because we know the defense has been there super solid all year long, starting to see contributions from the one young kid, Tristan Gilbert Thibault, who, again, even in the Windsor game and the Ottawa game, having excellent days. Romeo Lucier having a solid day as well. And all this in the absence of Maxime Malafont, which was sort of a question that we had about them going into the Panda game of like, okay, Charles Eslan has been banged up. They're really putting a lot on this young man's shoulders. We haven't been seeing Maxime Malafont, and just the notion of, you know what, for this team to really make some hay in the playoffs, because again, they control their destiny. Just win and you're in. the question being like, even on Charles Asselin's best day, is there enough of a next man up to be able to supplement that even with a great defense? Do we feel like what we've seen the last couple of weeks and then getting that bye obviously is huge, not just for the rest purpose, but now to say, okay, maybe we found something. Let's start to now work through our reps with this core group. Do you feel like in the context of both this U of T game and just thinking about how prepped Ottawa is for the likelihood they do secure their playoff spot, do we feel like that offense is in a secure spot where when you piggyback it with the defense, some solid special teams plays, that they can make some noise?
I think so. I think with Josh Jansen playing with how well he has been and looking really natural in the pocket for Ottawa, I think he's playing some of his best football and he's elevating the play of everybody else. Charles Aslan, while maybe doesn't have the insane numbers that he was having in the beginning of the year, those numbers, while all credit to Mr. King, Charles Aslan, those were by necessity rather than actually showcasing things because for whatever reason, Ben Miracle really has been struggling this entire year. So they had to continuously hand off the ball or get the ball to Charles Aslan however they could. With the emergence of Josh Jansen into this offense and with how well they've been able to get things going here, I think that this offense is legit. I really, really love the play of Josh Jansen right now, especially we broke it down in a few other games, certainly, but even in the loss against Laurier, he's throwing the ball up to his receivers and just allowing them to go make a play. And it's not like Laurier has, anything other than outstanding defensive backs there. And these receivers were still coming down with the ball when they were given a chance to. So I really like the play of this Ottawa offense right now. I think Charles Aslan, if he can get healthy over this bye week and go into not only this Toronto game, but potentially into the playoffs as well, this is an Ottawa team that has the capabilities to upset a few teams if you don't take them seriously.
Yeah. And of course, like the top of the OUA standings is so strong, so top heavy that, that prospect of a true upset is still very well, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it would take quite an effort. But I'm right there with you. And especially when you pair it with the fact that, again, defensively, this is a team who now that they can score, their offense is in that place where they can score more points. We talk about this now for several years going now. They have a no-fly zone defensively when it comes to the passing attack. First in the league in the fewest number of yards that opposing teams are gaining in the pass. And we know the names: Patrick Cumberbatch, Kevin McTone, Danny Ferdinand. We haven't seen Eric Cumberbatch in a few weeks. And so again, with that bye week, hopefully he's getting healthier now. And just from that standpoint, again, of the way that you force a team to perhaps Tolu Ahmed as well in the mix, the way that you force a team to perhaps have to play, change up their play if again you're able to now put some points up, whereas opposed to if it's a low scoring game, if the other team's getting ahead and they can start running the ball. And to that point about Charles Aslan again, if they're now able to get a few scores early, get the defenses kind of lightening up the box with this legit passing attack, like these guys that we're seeing Josh Jansen hook up with. Again, this could be, as far as the teams that, again, in the likelihood of who's going to end up on that lower part of the playoff bracket, who could, if you were going to pick an upset team, like they'd certainly be like a very intriguing pick nonetheless. Of course, as we said, they have to get through U of T first and foremost. And again, it's been a tough year for U of T. You almost wish that you could flip this in their Waterloo game, just to the magnificence which was that performance. And again, that York game, they a few bounces here and there, they could have won it. It wasn't as pretty a game by any near the stretch of the imagination as that game against Waterloo. And maybe it's not even worthwhile to look at some of these last games, but unfortunately, you are what your record and what you've done in recent weeks are. And again, this is a team that's just been the Windsor game, they're held to under 100 yards total on offense. They get 171 against Western. We know that penalties were a large factor in that one. Bit of an odd game. And a team that's been banged up as well. We know this as well, like whether it's the fact that Scott Barnett went down, even though they had seemed to put the ball in Caleb O'Donoghue's hands. Garrett Ellis, haven't seen him now in a few weeks as well. We're like what Jack Narrows has done in the backfield, running the ball. Luke Stoikos, the veteran presence there. I don't know what to make of U of T right now. obviously they're still playing for pride. They're a young team still looking to develop, and it's a great challenge for them to go up against. And a team in Ottawa who, despite all those accolades we just spoke of, or all the adulation we just spoke of about them, they're obviously not quite in a tier of a Windsor and a Western, though, maybe a tier below, depending on your preference of that. For U of T going into this game, and I feel like I put you on the spot with this a few times now, but you're in that coach's room, you're on that bus heading out there to the nation's capital, and you're trying to set the tone for your guys of like, hey, here's how we end the season. What are you going into this one with? What are you game planning to say? All right, look, they're really strong in that secondary. We're a little banged up in our running back field. Do we really want to take advantage of that? Man, this passing offense has really taken and has really woken up, and they have a guy who, I don't know, like a top 5 MVP candidate in Charles Asselin, depending on how you make of it. What's your messaging if you're getting to be in that room or on that bus?
Well, first and foremost, you start this off and say, you got nothing to lose in this one. And if I'm Coach DA and Coach Kanichis, I'm going in there doing all of the calculations that you and I just did and saying, if we beat Ottawa, we can potentially spoil their season and knock them out of the playoffs. And that's the mentality going into this. If you can't get into the playoffs anyway, and then hell yeah, you use spoiler as a motivation piece. You got nothing left to lose. Leave it all on the line, that whole thing. When you look at this Ottawa defense, and I love that you brought up the complementary aspects of the two of them, because if this Ottawa offense can really start scoring, it forces other teams to get heavy into the pass. And suddenly you now look at an Ottawa team that is number 1 in pass defense in the entirety of the OUA, despite all of the other incredible defenses that are there. Now, they do an outstanding job going after the ball, 8 interceptions, 6 fumble recoveries as well, so they know how to take away the ball, 10 sacks in the year, and tied for first with 3 defensive touchdowns. So certainly this is a team by the numbers that looks like a lot. Now, the other piece to this, and exactly like you were saying, they are second last in rushing yards per game. So to go from the very best in the passing game to one of the, I don't want to say worst, but one of the teams that's struggling the most to stop the run, I think that's really where you start leaning on. You start trying to get your guy in Jack Nyros. If Lucas Stoikos is healthy, even Garrett Ellis, get these guys going on the run. If nothing else, show that there's a threat on the ground, bust out a couple of them. It doesn't have to be a 60-yard game by any means, but a 10 to 15-yard or even a 6 or 7-yard run. Now suddenly you're dealing with a 2nd and 3, 2nd and 4, way more manageable than anything else. You start having to devote more bodies into the box, and that's where Caleb O'Donoghue can find his guys in the passing game, especially if Chris Joseph is 100% healthy. He can use that speed, even just on a simple crosser route. So I think the run has to set up the pass in this one. You use the motivation of you got nothing left to lose, and you can also play spoiler here, and that's where this U of T team is coming in, going to the nation's capital with a big challenge in front of them.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And in the same way that this might then take a little bit of the shine off of those passing numbers for Ottawa, it could just be the function that, well, then if teams are either teams are then saying, well, hey, if we can't pass the ball, then one way or the other, we got to run the ball. And then just by proxy of the number of rushing attempts you get, those numbers add up. Or vice versa. If teams are saying, hey, look, this is where we can really attack them, we don't need to pass the ball that much. So then why do we even need to bother like throwing the ball downfield? And then as a result, the numbers reflect that. As you highlighted, to supplement the passing yards or lack thereof that Ottawa gives up in the air, obviously that when teams do pass it, they're taking the ball away from other teams in this, that, and the third. I went back, though, and looking from the U of T standpoint of if that is the plan to say, I mean, first and foremost, the playing spoiler is always as a classic, as classic as they come in terms of how you can get the team fired up for that. And you look at, though, as you mentioned, whether it's again Chris Joseph healthy, Jake Osteen we haven't now seen since the York game, and you talk about setting up, if you are going to set up the pass, set up the pass with the run, I should say, going back to that Waterloo game. You had Garrett Ellis get nearly 100 yards on the ground. You see him even get over the 100 yards mark. I think it was early in the season against against Mac. And I'm pretty sure, much like what Jake Oseen, we haven't seen him since I don't believe I went back to check. We didn't even see him in the Battle of Toronto. So again, hoping that young man is okay because I believe he's just young in terms of his eligibility. And just again, when this team's offensively was at its sharpest, it was able to move the ball with him on the ground and everything like that. So again, it's going to be tough. Again, this is a U of T team that was in a tough position to begin with, just with being having new leadership, some new players, a super young quarterback, and trying to reconcile that with a really banged up season. Tom, I don't have too much more on this one from your standpoint. Any other angles you want to look at?
Yeah, I think when you look at this, and certainly with how Ottawa is coming into this game with a massive win against Carleton, finally starting to see some kind of production on offense, going into the bye week, getting as healthy as possible to then end off the regular season in this game. I think this is a very big mountain for U of T to climb here. I think that you mentioned it, your pick off the top. I'm also going with the Ottawa GGs in this one. I think that they are poised to continue to get better and better and better. And even if nothing else, even if, and I know I'm looking ahead here, but let's say that Ottawa wins this game and then they lose in their next game in the playoffs, I think the future of this program is Josh Jansen, no matter what. He still has a few years left. I think at least 2 more years of eligibility left. You ride this young man and you make sure that he is your bell cow going into this. We don't know what the split was between, Ben Miracle and Josh Jansen in the training camp going into this one, if Ben Miracle is taking the majority of the reps or not. But I think no matter what, obviously this is the last year for Mr. Ben Miracle. So Josh Jansen goes into this, and you have a lot of positive things going into this one for this Ottawa squad. Once again, I'm getting way far ahead of me, but I think you're very optimistic if you're a GG's fan watching this team, especially watching this offense ever since Josh Jansen took over here. I think they take care of business in this one, and they start building and building and building to what's going to be, regardless of who they play, I think a very good playoff game.
Yeah, most certainly. And yeah, again, I'm there with you on the Ottawa pick. Ottawa sealing the deal and securing their spot in the playoffs. Now, move to the next 1 o'clock game. We have two teams that are very much pulling for the U of T Blues, I guess, in that first game, because it would certainly fatten up their chances of making the playoffs, perhaps irrespective of the outcome of this one. I'll have to remember how that works out in the end. It's York visiting McMaster, a game that we're going to be there live for, a game that I'm so excited for, a game that with the possibility of the York Lions win. I don't know if there's a better definition of the notion of Schadenfreude that could possibly come about with the pleasure I would be taking, not in your because of your pain, but in spite of it nonetheless. Because this is again, there's a few machinations at play. Both these teams pretty well need the win. For Mac, their pathway in is a bit more, we'll say, creative if they end up falling in this one. Hopefully, I'm remembering that correctly, that they could end up in a 3-5 situation. If they lose and still make their way in, I think we did some maths to figure that one out. For York, most certainly, 2-6 is not going to cut it. You need this win, and almost certainly, well, I shouldn't say almost certainly because there's some weird things that could happen. But again, like with this first one, like with the first one, talking about Ottawa, to quote Al Davis, just win, baby. York coming in off of the loss to Guelph, but looking really sharp in that outing. Mac coming off the win against Waterloo, the overtime game, offensively looking good. Waterloo having a really nice offensive outbreak against your defense, which had been so solid all year long. What Quentin Springer did on the ground. We look at this matchup right now. Sean Law's been looking really strong. Obviously, Keegan Hall's been looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the whole country. Nice matchup there on the quarterback, from the quarterback standpoint. What do you make of this one?
A very interesting squad that this McMaster team has, most definitely. We've been talking about the passing game no matter what this is what McMaster is going to live and die by. But we've seen something of a resurgence of the run in this scenario, opposite to what we just kind of talked about with Toronto. But the pass is definitely setting up the run. Micah Duchene obviously has the big day that he has against Waterloo, but a lot of those yards, at least big chunks of those, are coming off with draw plays in obvious passing scenarios, which for McMaster is any scenario right now. Even if it's a 2nd and 2, there's still a very strong possibility that they pass the ball rather than run it. In that area, it makes teams be susceptible to the draw play, which we've seen, like I said, a couple of times here, and that's where a lot of those big chunk yardage has come from. Now, regardless of that, we have started to see a tiny bit of a run game, a semblance of a run game from these McMaster Marauder squad recently here. However, you start looking at the quality of opponents and how well they've been doing against the run in that case, and I certainly think that that's something to be said. But something that I did not foresee in this one, just on the year for McMaster, is the defense. Now, the beginning of the year, you and I looking around being like, yeah, this is still the top tier McMaster defense. They're still really good at what they do. But now I mentioned that Ottawa was second last in stopping the run. That's because McMaster is dead last in the league stopping the run right now. You've got teams who are able to run all over them. Certainly, while everybody's going back and forth about the McMaster Western game, and when I say everybody, I mean really just me, because I picked the boys. At no point did I think that it was going to be a blowout by any means. I thought certainly Western might win by a couple of scores, maybe even 3, but to see the absolute beatdown that we saw against them. Now, obviously, the offense didn't help them in that scenario by any means, but Western punted once in that game, and then they scored every other drive, including when their backups were in. So this is a defense that's gotten away from what I think really makes them great in stopping the run and really forcing teams into bad scenarios, where you start seeing that quote unquote Scott Brady dancing bear defense. When you're in a 2nd and long, you've got guys walking around and might be sending 7 up or dropping guys out. This is something that I wasn't foreseeing into this game, is that this McMaster defense has certainly been struggling in the last few games, even against Waterloo, when we see Quentin Springer really go out and do his thing. Even previous to that, the win against Carleton that they had, we saw Carleton's run game explode in that one. We saw the entire line of scrimmage move. Now, there's no Mitchell Price in that one, certainly, and maybe he's a little banged up, even though he did come back in the last game. But that's just some of my thoughts. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I mean, for one, if we're talking about Mac defensively, we also saw last week Malchus Alunga's best performance maybe of his career in a game when you take into consideration the caliber of the opponent that they were going up against. And we know the Guelph's defense, like that, the offense is what makes them like extremely special. It's a good defense, not an extraordinary defense by any means. So from that standpoint, I'll be very interested to see how York's looking to move the ball. We obviously saw Sean Law taking a few big shots downfield, and that connection he has with Avery Ford, and obviously we know what Avante McCoy can do for them. So some weapons they have there. To me, the part of it I'm the most interested in is how is the matchup between Mac's offense and York defensively, because I go back to the commentary we had going into Mac versus Waterloo. And again, to no surprise, the comparison that we like to draw between Coach Greg Knox and Coach Kevin McNeil. They're both really aggressive. And we saw McNeil seemingly, and again, it would be so much fun to talk to him after the season to see if that we're to validate or to disprove what we think our eyes showed us, which is that he was saying against a team that can just slice and dice you up in the passing game, let's sit back a little bit more. We obviously saw, as you alluded to, Mac getting the ground game going with Duchene, with those draw plays. Obviously, again, thinking about Mac's offense, Braden Kelly was out for that one. We saw him come out in the Western game. So whether or not Coach Knox is going to have the same approach. And one of the things, too, that if it sort of regardless, that, again, just makes this Mac offense so special, that just came to my attention as I was going through some things as we were getting set up here today, was they have so many weapons at the receiving core. I don't think it's been since, I think even before Western, maybe that Carleton game, that we saw Nicholas Adair.
Mhm.
Because again, because either they're just so deep at the receiving core that I'm like, okay, he's not getting on the stat sheet, but he's out there taking reps, which again, just big thumbs up for you, Mac. If you're really that deep at receiver that he can get buried just by proxy of being like, hey, feed the hot hand, this, that, and the third. We have so many weapons. We don't really have a guy. We have guys, plural. I lean more towards, and I'm trying to remember if he got hurt or something like that. Because he was, if you were again to, you look at the efforts of the Jackson too, in Jackson Taylor, Jackson Cooling, James Priester has started to put together a nice year for himself now that we've seen more consistency out of him. Danker has had some good moments, but really Nicholas Adair, I think, has arguably been, if you were going to say who's like the top guy, and I'll throw it back to you on this. Again, if you know anything about Nicholas Adair, and of course, with your familiarity with Greg Knox, and also we talked about this like months ago. This is the Greg Knox revenge game, right? How you see Knox attacking this Mac defense, because Guelph did a really great job, especially in using their play action game at just saying, okay, you're gonna send that +1 defense. We're gonna quick play action fake, max protect, and then for in the case of Guelph, it's my guy, our guy, and Willem Arsenault just streaming down the field and Aboud hooking up with him. So that's more so where my eyes take me in this matchup, much like with the Waterloo matchup. Do you know anything about Adair? Am I wrong in sort of piecing that together? And how do you think your guy in Knox is going to prepare for his old team? Is he going to keep all gas, no brakes in terms of just bringing pressure, or is he going to do what McNeil did a little bit from our standpoint, just watching and say, okay, hey, look, if they want to run the ball, all right, let's see if Duchesne can repeat what he did last week.
So starting off, I don't have any additional information on Nicholas Adair. I can confirm what you were saying. The last time that we saw him was that Carleton game. So I would assume if we haven't seen him since, especially with the bye week in between there, that he's
Yeah.
probably dealing with something and going to be out for this one as well. But most definitely they are deep at receiver. And not to take anything away from the receivers, most definitely, but when you have a guy in Keegan Hall that can get you the ball in certain areas where it's only you can catch it, that also lends a long way to making your receivers that much better as well. Now, coming into this one with the York Lions, York's defense hasn't exactly been the great. They are dead last in passing yards per game, which does not help going into this one, most definitely. Only one interception on the year, 4 fumble recoveries, and 6 sacks. So certainly still trying to find themselves in this one. When we spoke to Coach Knox after the Guelph York game, he mentioned that a lot of the guys who were there were new guys who were coming in, whether they're CJFL guys or somebody else that they might have been recruiting. I think on the entirety of the offense and the defense starters at bare minimum, there's only 2 York players that were starters last year going into this one. So certainly a lot of change ups, but that means that this team is going to take a lot of time to really get used to things and how trying to make sure that they can get used to that Knox defense, which I know better than anybody how damn confusing that can be. And the amount of times where, for folks who haven't played at the university level, it's very common at least once, twice, maybe 3 times per week, you're doing a 12-on-12 game situation where it's your first team offense against your first team defense, really just to get the competitive juices going and really to do your thing. So afterwards, when we're watching film, I'd be in the room with our offensive line coach, shout out to Coach Jason Riley, looking at the film, and he's going, yeah, we would have to change up our entire blocking scheme if we were blocking this defense here. So look at your one-on-one battles and let's move on. So with that, and I do genuinely feel bad for you having to scheme against a Knox defense. But I think he's not been able to open up the entire playbook as of yet. I think he's still adding in pieces by piece and certainly dealing with a lot of injuries. We haven't seen Brody Clark in the last few
Yeah.
games, along with a few other prominent names on that York defense. So this is the defense that is dealing with a lot of injuries and certainly dealing with a new playbook and a new coordinator going into this one. Based off of what we've been seeing here, I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit more of a Waterloo style defense, even in the idea of maybe you come up and you show 7 up, or maybe you come up and you show pressure and then you drop out of it. You do whatever you can to disguise the defensive secondary so that Keegan Hall isn't just sitting back going, hey, I've got whole coverage on the one side and cut on the other side. Let's pick this team apart. The other thing that this team is known for, and shout out to Adam McGuire and your co-host, my apologies, I still don't remember his name, for calling this out in the Mac Waterloo game, but McMaster, for ever since Coach P has been there, is a team that loves crossers. They love their crossing routes right in front or right behind of those linebackers there to try to confuse them in that sense. So if you have a crosser concept coming and instead of sending 7 up, you're dropping guys back to get into those crosser lanes, that's potentially where some mismatches or some interceptions can happen here. So look for, in my opinion, Coach Knox to show pressure, not necessarily always bring it, but really make sure that he's disguising as best as he possibly can what kind of coverages they are in.
Yeah, I think that works beautifully for, again, as yeah, when you're talking about those crossing routes, and then all of a sudden if it's like a zone drop where there maybe pressure from one side, and all of a sudden that that defensive end just went into the hook to curl zone where I was expecting that crosser to go. Again, I'm really curious on that side of things. Tom, there's the part of me that just looks at all these weapons that Keegan Hall has offensively, looks at just from not just Coach Brady and all the things that we see him do year in, year out, just as a coordinator, and again, just from the creativity to just the successes of his teams, but then just looking at the names of like your Carter Bladds, your Drake Bodie's, Yohan Shimbalonga, who's been a really nice addition. We're seeing Mitchell Price come back for them, Ethan Stewart, our guy, and Josh Cumbers. It's just like it's a deep defense, and it's a young York team, obviously with the veteran quarterback and Sean Law, who's been around the block, been around the whole country, and that just looks at this and it says, you know what, when we look at just the names on paper and everything like this, good game, but Mac takes care of business at home. But there's the part of me that thinks about it from the standpoint of a Mac team that's albeit returning home, but with the expectation that you're the favorite in this one. And York, in similar fashion to what you said about U of T, frankly, comes into this game with absolutely nothing to lose. And if there's one thing that we've learned about Coach Dexter Janke, and again, I don't know the name of the individual who commented this on our YouTube feed. First of all, thank you for tuning in and thank you for commenting that, as much as I cried to the high heavens, that it really should be head coach Mark Soria winning Coach of the Year. And we certainly acknowledge that Dexter Janke should be up there. If he's not winning it, then number 2 to Coach Soria. Golly, has that man done an outstanding job in changing the culture and getting his boys fired up. And I would give anything to be a fly on the wall in those meeting rooms, on the bus, in the locker room before a game, for whatever the speech is, when he tells his guys that they're about to go out there and seal victory, to be able to knock Mac out. Well, again, maybe not exactly, and get themselves in the playoffs for the first time in, gosh, I wish I had that ready. And this York team and the swagger that they have, frankly, is more than anything else I could quantify in looking at names, looking at stats, looking at anything. To the York fans, I still haven't received that costume, but send it my way, because we'll be there in the stands and I'll be wearing it to watch your Lions seal the deal, take out Mac in Ron Joyce, and head to the playoffs. Tom, I'm taking York on the road here.
Yeah, and when you really look at this game, for the folks who have actually been watching York football, that is not a hot take. Not to necessarily take a shot at McMaster, but more so to really look at York and what they've been building and what Sean Law brings to this offense, and certainly how well the defense has been slowly but surely really coming along here. When you look at this game and you look at all of the variables, like you mentioned, an outstanding atmosphere at York right now. The positive vibes that are there, just the overall culture change has been outstanding. I know for a fact that, especially as a defensive coordinator, when you play for Coach Knox, you are one of his guys. You want to play for that man. You want to play for Coach Janke, most definitely. And I don't know how he's wording it, but I'm certain that Coach Knox has been talking about how he didn't exactly leave McMaster on the best terms and how he wants a little bit of revenge against the boys in maroon. So I'm expecting that defense to come out and play lights out. To McMaster, I think going into this one, you have the understanding of, listen, your season certainly didn't start how you wanted it to. You've scraped by with a few wins in tough scenarios. You have the opportunity now to win this game and to solidify yourself in the playoffs where anything can happen and really get there. I think going into this one, York is going to come with a ton of passion, a ton of emotion, and the belief that they can truly win this game, and you are going to see the very best. But I think McMaster weathers the storm. I'm taking the Marauders at home in this one. The big reasoning for me is this defense. Last in the league right now in passing yards. And as of last week, I don't know of anything going into this week, but as of last week, 4 starters on that York defense who were injured and not playing. So in that's what tips the scales for me. But before I pass it back to you, I also want to ask you a question because in that YouTube comment, they detailed it beautifully for us. In your opinion, if York beats McMaster and gets into the playoffs, does Dexter Janke win the head coach of the year because he took a team that was losing by 70 points into the playoffs? But then also you look at the work of everything Coach Soria has done in completely flipping the script on a Guelph squad and having them play at some of the top tier of the OUA. What's your take on that?
It's really interesting. And on the one hand, and because on the one hand, and not to say that like this is going to be like if York wins the game, they make the playoffs, then that's like great. That's the ceiling that they've hit. They can now make the playoffs. I only expect with how he's going to be able to recruit, rejuvenate that program. I think they have room to grow. There's part of me that likens it almost to when Russell Westbrook won the OUA MVP, the NBA MVP in 2016, 17, whenever that was, where it was like, man, first guy to average triple double since like the 60s, Oscar Robertson, all that stuff. That in itself was so significant that it kind of everything else kind of paled in comparison. There's another interesting factor in all this of just the number of, and I think you kind of mentioned this when we were talking about it on the last episode, of just the number of new faces that came into the York program. Obviously, we do look at the Avante McCoys, the Melks Alungas, some of the guys on the O-line, Lyons Davies, and some guys on the defensive side of the ball, but a lot of those guys from the West Shore Rebels. And again, you could just tip your cap and say, yeah, well, duh, that's just because of Coach Janke. Like they don't get all those new faces without him. And then and then when you compare that, and again, it might just be different strokes for different folks when you look at the fact that for Coach Soria, he's in that program, he's with a lot of these guys, and it's a change of leadership with, a few tweaks here and there. And all of a sudden, you flip the script and now you're one of the best teams. You're a nationally ranked team. It's tough. So there's part of me saying like, you know what, maybe you do give it to Coach Janke for this year. And you say, well, then next year, Coach Soria is going to be competing for second or first in the OUA. And then you say, man, this guy's legit, or it's tough. The kind of overcoming that inertia of going from a winless program to getting into the playoffs, getting those 3 wins, arguably is greater than a team that, obviously was in some ugly games. We've talked about those Windsor matchups for Guelph over the last few years. They're not making the playoffs, and it's just a really disappointing program in the face of having great recruiting classes, having great resources, all those things. So you say like the program that had it all couldn't get it done. And then seemingly this one guy changes it all. Whereas this program that had nothing, and that's not a shot at the players, but just like seemingly just from the top down, just problems riddled through there. And this guy comes in and brings the cavalry with them, and they get it going. I'll just stick with I admit my bias in my love for Guelph, what Coach Soria is doing there. And it's a more traditional pick, I suppose, to say like, yeah, that goes from 2-6 to 6-2, 0-8 to possibly 3-5, make the playoffs is major as well. frankly, I won't feel sour about it one way or the other. If I was to put money on it, I'd give it to the 6-2. But then again, like fourth, if it's Guelph in fourth place, and York just there in like sixth or seventh, like that's not even that big a gap anyway, either way. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. And again, shout out to the commentator. But I think again, like you can just it's great barroom conversation of like, well, no, this means more. Well, no, this means more. I think it's ultimately different strokes, and it'll all depend on those folks who get the votes. Different strokes for different folks with different votes, I guess. And none of those people are us. Shame on you, U Sports.
We would love to get into those conversations for voting in that sense. Certainly, we cover the OUA enough that I feel like we deserve it. But I digress. What I'm really interested in is that we are starting to see why Can West football has been so great with how their programs happen. A lot of those kids who play out west will finish their high school career and then play for a year or two in the CJFL and then go to university. And that's exactly what we're kind of seeing. Very similar to how Quebec does with their CJEP programs. But even then, those guys who are coming from the CJFL are a year or two older in that sense. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think that this is a one and done with the West Shore Rebels or anybody from the CJFL, because remember, Coach Rick Walters, while he was the offensive coordinator for the Alberta Golden Bears, he has also spent a number of years as a coach for the CJFL team that's out in Edmonton. And right after their game against Guelph, those coaches I saw from Coach Janke's story, they were out in Okanagan with the Okanagan Sun, and that team is damn good in the CJFL. So I don't think that this is not a one and done for the CJFL guys. I think there's going to be more and more that are coming to York and potentially to everywhere else, and we'll really get a chance to see what Canada West and just Western Canada football really looks like.
That's a great point, and hopefully that just opens the door as well for Can West or Western Canadian guys. And York's had, I mean, the York itself has had actually a really good track record of bringing guys in from Alberta. You know, thinking about I believe Luther Kunavan, who was from out that way. Obviously, the Hunchak brothers, I believe, were from out that way. So somehow they always get it done in that regard as well. But you know, either way, just great to see both those programs really turning it around. Tom picked Mac. I picked York. Let's head on to our next game. It's the Waterloo Warriors trying to pick up their first win of the season, going into their last game of the season when they take the trip eastbound on the 401 to Kingston, Ontario to take on the Queens Golden Gales from Richardson Stadium, coming off the bye week. Queens, of course, prior to that was duking out with the Laurier Golden Hawks, falling by 30 points, but a game that we were still impressed with. Thomas is a Queens team who, when we look at the standings as of right now, they sit in fifth place at 4-3. Their destiny seems pretty set in stone, of that being the fifth place kind of being their destiny. With the win, they go 5-3, and at best they can tie with Windsor, but Windsor has the head-to-head. At worst, if they lose, they're 4-4, and Ottawa and Mac could tie with them in theory, but Queens has head-to-heads there. So it seems like that fifth spot, traveling to whomever ends up in the fourth place spot there, is set in stone for them, win or lose. Much like we've talked about with some of these other teams, getting healthy is a major piece for this Queens team, arguably as much as any team in the OUA. They're coming off the bye, so I'm really excited to see some of the guys they trot out there. But let me put you in the shoes of these coaches again, because I seem to do that all the time. You're a great coach, Tom. You know what you're doing there. You come off that bye and you look at, you know, whether it's Jazz Cara or any of these guys on the offensive line who've been banged up. You look at a guy in Jared Kasari. You look at a guy in Alex Vreekin. If those guys are ready to play, able to play, and you say, well, we're probably set in stone for that fifth spot anyways, do you trot out your A game? Some of these guys haven't got live game day reps in weeks, or do you say, and again, it might very well just matter on like the training staff being like, look, they just aren't truly ready. You could push them if you want to, but they really just aren't ready, and it's settled at that. But we know that that level of gray is pretty vast when it comes to like what ready means. So assuming that they could play in this one, and there's probably some other guys I'm not thinking about. Thinking about Silas Hubert and that shoulder. I feel like those are the major ones that we've been seeing this year. If you're making decisions with this team, Coach Steve Snyder gives you a call after we hang up here. Tom, what do you think? What are you telling him about a team where this game is, I don't want to say meaningless. It's an OUA game. It's one of the 8 that these teams get to play in the regular season. And there's some other pieces on the coaching matchups I really want to dive into that have me really excited about this one. But just from that standpoint, a team that's been so banged up, a team that when they're at their best can compete with anyone in the OUA. How do you, if you were to make their decisions, decide what to do here?
When you look at this, obviously there's a number of other variables that kind of come into this. What's the severity of some of their injuries? How well have things been going, progressing for them? Because there's going to be certain times where, hey, he's got an injury and he's not ready to go. And then, that decision is completely off your table anyways. When you look at this, the thing to also remember is that if you guys are going up against real competition in practice, which I do believe that Queens is, and certainly those one-on-ones, Queens offense when they're operating at their best and Queens defense when they're operating at their best are some of the best in the OUA, bar none. If you're getting really significant reps with some of those guys, like if Alex Vreekin is back at being able to throw against a Keegan Vanek, Ashton Miller-Melanson, and the rest of that defensive backfield, I think you can still make sure that he is as close to being game ready or having those game bullets in those scenarios. So if he is on the cusp, I think you're safe to just say sit this one out, especially the fact that Anthony Leo so far has been playing some great football on the year. I know obviously he hasn't played in every game, but in the games that he has played, 35 for 53 for 66% completion, 395 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. So he's smart with the football. He's getting the ball into certain guys' hands where they're really able to make a difference here. And I think in that scenario, you say, you know what, we're okay. Jared Kasari is a big if for me because if that offensive line isn't super healthy and Kasari is now going to be taking a whole bunch of unnecessary hits, I think that's another one where you're saying, okay, let's get this guy off. Let's make sure that you are, as healthy as possible going into the playoffs, because you and I both know, I don't remember off the top of my head your playing experience with this, but I can certainly speak for myself. Going into the playoffs with a win, vastly different than going into the playoffs with a loss in your last game of the season here. So it's not like you want to rest everybody, even if it doesn't change anything for you in the OUA standings. The feeling of the team, if you don't come out with a win the last game of the season, especially a game where you should win, that can send a real bad message going into the game here. So there's a lot of things, but regardless, and I know I might be a little biased here. I know I spoke about whatever else. If an offensive alignment is on 50-50, you're playing. 100% you're playing. You need live bullets. You need to see what's in front of you. You need that game experience. I'm putting those guys in and potentially sitting some of my other guys.
Well, Tom, firstly, you damn well know 2 of my 5 seasons started with losses to your Marauders and remained victorious until we then faced you in Yates Cups to lose again. So yeah, we won games going into the bloody playoffs, Tom. You know this. Just gonna be your stupid Marauders.
I wasn't sure if you had lost, if you ended the season with a loss. You guys were pretty damn good in your time there.
No. I was corrected last year when I said 6-2 years for Guelph. We were 7-1, baby. Come on now. No, I agree with what you're saying about the injury for the offensive line, because at this point, like whatever these guys are dealing with, you're dealing with. It's one of these situations where, I mean, hopefully it's nothing where someone's having to go under the knife in the off season, something like that. But really, that the extra week, and we were joking with some people we knew at Guelph, every now and then you hear people talk about vet days here and there and whatnot. Yeah, you get that, the occasional vet day in a practice, so on and so forth. But yeah, at this point, whatever you're dealing with, you're dealing with. But what I'm really interested in is, again, for a game where we look at, for Waterloo, obviously, you've been playing some really strong football. It hasn't parlayed into wins, which I know for a lot of observers is the be all end all, and it is the be all end all. Like, that's say, having fun is fun, but winning is more fun than fun is fun. Like it's all great and everything, but at the end of the day, we're here to accomplish a goal. For all these teams, we play in the same league. As much as we can divide them up into tiers, OUA doesn't work like that. It doesn't matter if you finished 11, if you finished first, you're supposed to be in the same league until anything is drawn up differently. It's ain't horseshoes, right? And I'm certain that with Coach Bertoya, Coach Conway, Coach McNeil, everyone there, I'm certain that some degree of the messaging reflects that. But they have been playing good football, and I say all that despite my inclinations, my own philosophy in life of just that process, that progress over the product, and that the product will come, but you have to trust that process. We saw a couple weeks ago, gosh, at this point, it might have been a couple months ago, when York went to go visit Queens. And it was a game I just had it up in front of me where Queens ends up picking up the win 52-19. The 19 alone, we're looking at being like, oh man, look at these York Lions. And that was a great day for our guy in Alfred Olay. But the biggest thing I think we walked away from that one saying, and that's a game where Kassar was limited. He'd already been a bit banged up, but is a game in which, Queens only rushes. What did I have the number? Queens rushes for 121 on the ground. Where York really, with and again, aggressive DC, and guess who we're gonna start talking about? Coach Kevin McNeil, an aggressive DC, really sells out, and you just get that impression where he's saying, okay, look, I'm gonna make my mark on this field one way or the other, and I'm going to say, I don't care if your bell cow is injured. I'm going to shut down the thing you do the best. And of course, on that day, Vreekin has a nice day. He goes 22 for 29, 302, 2 touchdowns. Beautiful. Chef's kiss, right? We know that, again, if this guy's healthy, this team can do great things. Jane Gertzy McDonald has 51 on the ground, right? We've seen some positive things from him. Jared Sorry still gets in the end zone. But in this one in specific, though, we have our guy in Coach Matt Nesbitt, offensive coordinator for Queens, going up against Kevin McNeil, the DC that Nesbitt and I both played under, but on the other side of the ball at Guelph. And two guys who I'm certain are very eager to outfox, outmaneuver, outduel the other. From Coach Nesbitt's standpoint, I don't know what that looks like because obviously he's getting ready for the playoffs. From Coach McNeil's standpoint, we looked at last week how it seemed like he did change up. We talked about this already. It felt like he changed up his plan a little bit and saying, all right, hey, look, we're here playing Mac. They got this incredible passing attack. Let's lighten things up a little bit and force them to run it. I would bet some money that Coach McNeil's coming in this one being like, I will get in pads myself and be the 13th man and take the penalty. I'm going to go at the quarterback. I'm going to bring the full house. I'm going to send everything. They say everything but the kitchen sink. I'm sending the kitchen sink too. Sending everything he has just at that offense and saying, okay, Nez, good luck. Deal with it. Now, of course, Nez, like myself, had to deal with those blitz packages when we practiced against. Same way that you've talked about dealing with Coach Knox. That's one thing I know for sure about this game is that McNeil's number one goal, his MO is I am going to make Nez's life an absolute living nightmare in this game. His team's banged up. They're trying to clean things up, polish up for playoffs. And sometimes like when you're in practice and you have to tell the defense, all right, guys, hey, look, can you just play base? We're trying to install a new play. Just play your base so we can get our principles right. We can get to our landmarks. I get it. You want to have your opportunity playing scout team right now. I respect that. I'm a scout team guy, but right now your job is to be at that defensive end position and get yourself blocked, right? McNeil's not having that in any way whatsoever, and I'm really excited to see it from that standpoint.
I love that you brought that up because 100%, especially with any kind of personal ties, I think Coach McNeil, Coach K-Mac is always in the interest of sending pressure, of really having a stout defense. But you and I both know when you know the other guy, when you're buddies with the other guy, that just gives you a little bit extra to say, hey, I got you the next time that you see each other, maybe at a Guelph reunion or something. Hey, you remember that time when we came to your house and we got you? I think that this Waterloo squad, certainly coming into this one, is you got nothing to lose as well. We spoke about it with Toronto, but they're playing some of their best football in the latter parts of the season here, and unfortunately, just have been on the losing effort of a few, including the last game that they played against McMaster, where a goalpost to stop you from
Oy.
getting an extra point off of a score potentially stopped you from winning a game in this one. So it's just bad bounces in the literal sense of that word, keeping them off of the out of the win column. But certainly anybody who's actually watching this Waterloo squad knows they are pretty good, and that defense has really been showing out so far. I have been really, really loving the play from number 40, Michael Omaseni, for these Waterloo Warriors middle linebacker. He's been outstanding for them so far, obviously having a couple of interceptions against Laurier, against Mr. Taylor Elgersma being the highlight here. But even in the last game against McMaster, he finished the game with 10 total tackles, leading his team. So I love the play that we're starting to see from them. James Hinsberger, still, like you've mentioned before, Waterloo defenses with a Hinsberger, you're going to be just fine. So I love the play that this defense is really starting to showcase in here. I think you're going to see a ton of pressure. I think you're going to see unconventional blitzes. I think that halfback blitz is coming. And I'm not necessarily in the standard of what you were talking about previously, where he loves to send that overload with the wheel and a half. We're certainly going to see that, but I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see a little bit of variation on that, certainly against a guy who's the offensive coordinator who would have been going up against your first team defense in those 12 on 12 scenarios, like I was just mentioning, and seeing some of the tendencies that you have on the defensive side of the ball. So expect to see a couple of wrinkles into what we've seen so far in this Waterloo defense. But what I'm really interested in is I do want to see the progression of Nolan Caban and what the rest of this offense for Waterloo certainly looks like. Quentin Springer obviously has the monster game against McMaster, 35 attempts, 224 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now that's against a McMaster defense like we detailed that's been really struggling to stop the run, whereas Queen's defense pretty good.
They're pretty
I
good
mean,
at
they're
that.
not top by any means in the OUA, but this is a team that has one of, if not, and I don't even think I need to say if not, I think they have outright the best defensive line in the country here, backed up by guys in at linebacker that are no slouches themselves, including my dude and Justin Pace. So you've got a top tier defense that you're going up against, albeit sure, maybe Silas is dealing with a shoulder injury or whatever. You still got Darian Newell, you still got Van Wishart, and even Oliver or Olivier Jackson. My apologies, I don't have your proper spelling in front of me here, but has been playing outstanding football as well. So the defensive line, the depth there is outstanding, even if Silas is not in, and if he is in, he's a game changer in and of itself. So how is Ethan Collier and the rest of that offensive line going to adjust for these guys up front? What's the game plan going to be going into this one? And Nolan Caban, are you really the guy going into this game? The last thing that I'll say before I toss it back over to you, I reached out to Nick Orr after we saw him in the boot against when Waterloo played Guelph somewhere with the midpoint of the season, and he told me he was aiming to come back for Queens. Don't
Oh,
know if that means he'll be back. However, Nolan Caban has been playing some outstanding football recently. I don't know that it's a huge game changer, but I do think that Nick Gore brings a little bit extra to this offense. So if he's able to come back in this one, that would certainly be something to look out for.
that's so interesting because on the one hand, you can kind of leave it up to them as saying, hey, look, last opportunity for competition until we return for winter camps, spring camps, and then summer training, and obviously everything else that's going to go on in that program. On the one hand, it's so far away from next year that like even if they're doing like a one half to the other or just switching series, whatever it is, and one clearly has the better outing, again, that's a long way away from the start of the 2025 season that like it'd be foolish for us to sit here and say, clearly we've seen positive things from both these young guys that so and so clearly has won the spot for next year. But that's really fascinating. And the other thing that's I think a fascinating aspect is you already brought up the incredible day Quentin Springer had, and maybe it wasn't news to McMaster, it was certainly news to us that for Anthony Miller, we see him get hurt. He's getting a surgery. He's done for the year. Um, Whether or not, again, that was news, because again, sometimes it's hard to get darn updates about OUA stuff unless you're just DMing guys. Come on, OUA, let's do a little better at that, right? 55-man rosters. Come on, let's bring that back. Depth charts. Come on now.
At least.
At the least. Whether or not that was something that Mac had ready in their game plan. Obviously, when you go down a running back, you'd think that that would only bolster whatever game plan they already had ready, McMaster that is. But again, we're going into this as a week seeing like, okay, Quentin Springer, the guy in the backfield, all the things that he's capable of doing. Tom, we talked about that defense, and I think arguably you could say best front seven perhaps in the OUA, because you also have Liam Sutherland's no slouch either in that linebacking core, along with your guy and Justin Pace, obviously, and all those tremendous defensive linemen. Let me throw it to you as an former offensive lineman, offensive line coach. When you think about the way that we see Waterloo rush the ball, we see them run those gap schemes, all those power, all those counters. It seems like actually at Mac seeing a bit more zone of just getting body on body and letting Quentin Springer, as shifty as he is, find the gap. But again, we've seen them going back to last year have a lot of success with those counter trays, those gap schemes. When you look at the guys that that Queens has on defense, and specifically thinking about an offense that runs the ball with those types of run schemes, how do you feel that fit works against, again, these monstrous guys in Newell and Van Wisher and Silas, when you're saying you're playing leverage more than you're playing, okay, let's win our one-on-one matchups or work a double team, and you have the opportunity to say, okay, look, I don't need to move you out of the way, but I just need to prevent you from going to this spot and use leverage. When you have such a dominant front seven, and we obviously saw against McMaster last year how bringing pressure in the right spots can really screw up that system, from the standpoint that those gap schemes often take advantage of leverage points that players have. Awesome. He's a gap away. Just got to make my seal here and force him to either go through me or around me. Get a puller going downhill through the gap, kickouts, whatever you're doing in your scheme. Does that bode better for an offense in trying to attack a front seven that's this stout? Or are you just best saying, look, let's just get hats on hats and let a guy like Quentin Springer find daylight and just hit that gap hard?
I think when you look at this, I think your power run game is certainly going to complement what you want to do better than a zone. Listen, we never want to disrespect offensive linemen in this, but one-on-ones against that defensive line, I'm taking Queens to win those one-on-ones. Ethan Kalra certainly can give some guys some work, but for the most part, I'm going to take that defense winning those one-on-ones in that zone scheme. Because as best as you possibly can, obviously you want to try to work to as many double teams as possible. If you start showing pressure, now suddenly you create one-on-ones, and I think those guys are going to win more than they lose on the Queen side of things. When you go power run game, that goes into exactly like what you were saying, where you don't necessarily need to drive a guy completely across the field. Obviously, if you do that, huge plus. You just need to keep them from getting where the ball is designed to go. With those designed runs, you can now change up your techniques a little bit so that instead of just trying to work a zone where you have to kind of square up and drive them off to allow your running back to make the decision here, now it's, I know this ball is going to my right. I can flip my head and I can drive the bus in this one and really make sure that I'm walling this guy off. I knew that drive the bus was going to make you smile.
I love that.
But you've got to drive the bus there, and now suddenly you don't have to drive them off, but now you've created a gap. You've created a wall off there, and Quentin Springer makes one guy miss in the hole, and he's gone. I think that really goes into a better game plan going in against this Queens defense, and was something that was your bread and butter last year. This is easily going to be one of the things that you, I think you can get back to and really focus on here. We've seen Queens obviously struggle against that exact kind of game plan against guys or teams like Western and that. Now, obviously, Western's power run game is one of the best in the nation, not just in the OUA, but still the pieces are there. And I think that's really what you try to do to get after this. And if somebody from Western, like I said previously, I'm not going to mention names, if somebody from Western is saying, let's try to run at Silas Hubert and the hell away from Darian Newell, I would suspect that they're not the only teams that are thinking that, and that you're going to see a few other teams adopt that same thing. So yeah, I think power run game is definitely going to be the way to go.
Just send Cholera downhill with a head of steam running at him
Yeah,
play after play.
a
No,
man with bad intentions.
yeah. Oh man, that drive the bus thing killed me, man. I love that. Oh God, God bless you, Coach McDonald. Tom, I don't have anything else on this one. Again, I'm really interested to see some of the matchups from the coaching standpoint. Really interested to see Waterloo continue with that growth, and really interested to see who Queens trots out as far as getting ready for the playoffs, coming off their bye and being really banged up. I'm going Queens at home though in this one. Again, either way, they're securing fifth spot and getting ready for travel to Windsor, maybe Guelph, possibly even Western. But yeah, I'm taking Queens at home in this one.
In the best of scenarios here, I think I'd take the Queen's Golden Gales, but to add a little bit extra, this is also Queen's homecoming. So you
Oh,
should see that stadium rocking. You should see a lot of people in for that. And the very last game of the season here, add a little bit extra for those boys in those golden tricolor. So yes, I'm going with the Gales at home to take this one.
Oh, homecoming. Yeah, that's this. No question at all. Hey, again, Waterloo, keep building, keep doing the things you're doing. We love you. Salute to you. Put out a great performance that week. And yeah, let's see what the Golden Gales have in store for us on their homecoming. Let's head now from Richardson Stadium to the other side of the province, to the Forest City, London, Ontario, where the Windsor Lancers are departing from the shadows of the Golden Arches, the safety of the Alumni Stadium, the blue collar gold swagger that travels so well hitting the road. Coach JP Cercelli, the Don, to take on his former team in the Western Mustangs. Western coming off a massive win in Toronto against the U of T Blues. For Windsor, coming off of a tight game against Laurier, where they fell despite having an opportunity to drive in their last drive to win the game, coming off of an opportunity in their last drive to win the game against Guelph the week before. Last time you and I were in London, folks, we're starting to chirp, chirp, chirp about those Windsor Lancers and just exactly how and who they played to get to that 5-0 start. So for some of those folks, vindicated by them now sitting at 5-2. But if you're Western, and again, those are folks around the team. Those weren't folks in the team. And
Mhm.
you know that Coach Greg Marshall, especially with his familiarity and no doubt his respect and admiration for his former colleague in Coach JP Cercelli, has his team nothing but prepared. This Western team, like we're seeing such great football around the OUA right now. And it sounds silly to say this because we're talking about Western. Like we're talking about so many teams playing their best ball, even teams that aren't winning games playing their best ball right now, arguably right now. And again, I just out of respect for what Laurier's done this year, I'm not going to actually say this, but if you were to do a power ranking of OUA, of the OUA right now, even though Laurier has the head to head, you're not crazy for still saying, yeah, I don't care. Western's still number one. I'm not gonna say that. I mean, this is such a cop out. This is a very like, no, people are saying type moment
There's
by
some
me.
people around the league who might be saying this. Yeah.
Someone in London, Ontario right now feels like Western's still the best team in the country. But like we know that's true. They're playing such good football right now on all sides of the ball, and a team that's also getting healthier, which is just bananas. This is a major heavyweight matchup to have in week 9 of the OUA season. We'll talk about the playoff implications because there is some reseeding that can happen. Both these teams are firmly not just in the playoffs, but with a home playoff game coming their way the following week. What are your initial impressions of this matchup?
This is going to be a very big test for the Windsor Lancers. I know that's a hot take anytime any team plays against the Western Mustangs, but especially for this squad because like you mentioned, there has been a lot of people and not from the Western Mustang coaching staff or the players or anything. We want to make that very clear from the fans that are watching this, but who have said, who have you played against? Who are the teams that you've really beaten? Now, you beat a very good Queens team, and nothing that should never take anything away from you there. But certainly, there's a lot of teams who are out there who are saying, "How good are you? Are you really this team at the end of the 401 that should be feared by all teams, by all members?" Or are you just beating the teams that you should be and not winning against the tight games? And that's the big question that everybody is looking to ask here. So certainly this is going to be a big test. Now, this is where the put up or shut up really comes into play, because going into this game, the number one rush defense in the land is the Windsor Lancers, even despite everything that Guelph was able to do in that game. Now, in this as well, Windsor is still the number two passing yardage leader as well. 8 interceptions on the year, 7 fumble recoveries, with 22 sacks on the year. That is absolutely something to be proud of, and certainly our guy in Claudia Mooson is still doing his thing. But we knew going into this that the Windsor defense is always going to be stout. They're typically always stout. You know, that one game against Guelph maybe an outlier, but typically always stout. My question here is that offense ready to compete at the elite level? Is that offense ready to be in a tight game with the Western Mustangs and be able to come out against them? How good is Danny Skelton really? Is Joey Zorn able to carry the team along with Christopher John in the run game to will them to victories? This is where all of those questions really get put up. Obviously, you weren't able to get the job done against Laurier, although it did come down right to the wire and you did hang with those guys. How well are you able to play against the top tier in the OUA? Because that's really at the end of the day what anybody cares about.
Yeah, and it's tough for Windsor here because again, the win. Someone was mentioning. Darn it. We even talked about this before. I had their name ready to go, and now he's going to hear this and he's going to be like, duh, it was me. Was saying that, correcting us, and that Windsor does have a pathway into second, which I don't see how that works, because at best, if you're tied with Guelph has the head to head. I'll let you maybe think that one through as you make your, doing math face over there. Don't worry, Tom, mine's the exact same face and it's uglier. But again, this is a team that's been banged up. We haven't seen Waby Mambo. Liam Talbot has been out the last couple of weeks, and he's been banged up all year. And as well, a team where, yeah, Danny Skelton looked all right in the last outing, but do I trust? No, not a function of trust, because it's not for me to say they should be starting at quarterback. But do I have any certainty that even if we see Skelton trot out to start the game, that he's going to be one to finish it? No. And is that a bad thing? I don't know. Probably not. They've forgotten more about football than I've ever learned. But just so a team where, in contrast to the situation that we just talked about with Queens, where you're going to a game where, your destiny's pretty set in stone and you can maybe play a little more conservative when it comes to some of your injured guys that might be on the way back. For Windsor here, the prospect of, having to deal with, because again, if it's Queens there in the 5th slot, right? And we've obviously seen Windsor take out Queens in Windsor, that week 1 game. That was a tight game. I don't think anyone in Windsor is saying, oh, we beat them already, like book our ticket for Laurier for the semifinals or anything like that. I don't think anyone's saying that. And again, not that, when you look down the standings, just based on how you and I are kind of picking things, the likelihood of it being maybe Ottawa or Mac or maybe York, or I don't know if York can sneak into 6th place. You're definitely I feel much more comfortable with Ottawa, especially if it's Ottawa having to go all the way across the bloody province to play you, or McMaster, who's been just in this really weird funk, if it's them, or again, I don't see how that could be York sneaking into the 6th spot or this, that, and the 3rd. But let's say it's Ottawa if you can get into the 3rd slot, or again, if it's true that they could get 2nd, that possibility. Not to say that any game is easy, but Queens is a 5th seed is such a stinker for whoever ends up in 4th. Because again, we don't know their health status, but even with them being banged up, they've still been a threat to some of these top teams that we've been seeing. Again, that Laurier game where Queens lost, albeit 30-point difference at the end of it, they're competitive. They're still playing some strong defensive football and running the ball really well. So it takes me back to this thought. If you're Windsor and you're going to Western to begin with, a tall task when you're at your healthiest. And we've seen them play some tight games, even 2 years ago, where the final score was like 50-18. It was something like 21-18 in the fourth quarter, and then
Mhm.
Western just went the heck off on them. And then last year, I think Western beats them 21-10. Windsor's been tight with them in ball games. So again, it's that tough spot. I'll sort of pass it off just on this thought. Nothing substantial I have to really say about it. Of being again, like if you're Windsor, you're going to this game, and obviously again, you just the mentality is you go in, we play to win, and all that. But if Liam Talbot's like, you know what, actually I don't know what's been ailing him, but let's just say ankle. The ankle's been feeling good, coach. Like, give me that jet sweep. You know what? Let me go run that fly. Like Skelton, throw it deep. I'll go get it. Waby saying, you know what? I'm back in there. The three-headed beast is back and ready to rumble. All these types of things. Or do you say, you know what? Hey, let's just get healthy and get ready to take on a Queens team. We'll be in the fourth, they'll be in the fifth, and let's be a little healthier from that. Again, we get to this part of the season, and those aspects become almost more intriguing to me than some of the matchups on the field. We'll certainly look at more of those matchups on the field because they're darn intriguing with this team, these two teams as well. But I still can't get over that piece of it.
No, and I think you bring up a really good point there where there's a lot of things happening in the last game of the last week of the season. There's a lot of teams that could go in a number of different places. I think the only team that's 100%, the only two teams that are 100% solidified in where they are is Laurier at number one and Queens at number five. Everybody else is up for interpretation and not up for interpretation, but everybody else has the potential to change around depending on how these games go. For Windsor, there, you certainly have a few guys that are banged up that could potentially come back and be real big game changers for you. Nick Domovsky is dealing with some kind of a hamstring
Yeah.
injury. I don't know the severity of that injury. He obviously came back in the Guelph game and really showcased some outstanding work. And I think this offense, in my eyes, seems to be at its best when Domovsky and obviously Talbot are healthy and ready to go here. I don't know what his status is. I'm going to assume for this one, he's going to be out. So we're going to see Danny Skelton. We did see Corson Roy jump into the game. He goes 3 for 3 for 35 yards against Laurier, but that was only because Mr. Skelton got injured on a certain play. I think when he was running out of bounds, he took a nasty hit, had to stay out for 3 plays, and then came right back into it. So I expect to see Danny Skelton back there. I think Liam Talbot is a massive, massive win if they are able to get him back because of the versatility that this young man has, whether that's on jet sweeps, a deep threat, or even coming into the backfield for a couple of plays like they've done previously. I think this Windsor offense and the capabilities that they have is really outstanding with all of the weapons. But then you look at it and you go, even if a Liam Talbot is back as a slot receiver, oh, you're going up against Richard Adu before. And even if you get past him in certain coverages, oh, you got Jackson Finley waiting for you as you come down the seam here as well. So it's not like there's holes in that Western defensive secondary because if Ottawa's number one, Western is knocking at the door. We could have this debate potentially after the season, but they're knocking at the door for number two for sure in that category. So I'm really interested to see how does Western adjust to what we're seeing here, but even more so, what are you going to do offensively to try to get them on the heels to really try to focus on the strengths that you have? Obviously, Joey Zor and Christopher John are outstanding. If Wegby Mambo can come back, the three-headed monster is alive and well, and that's a nightmare for teams with having three healthy horses being able to run the ball. But it's all going to come down to how well are you going to have, how well can Danny Skelton perform against a nationally ranked Western defense?
Yeah, no, totally. And from that standpoint, you can, again, for the Windsor faithful out there, you can just play it from the perspective of, hey, win or lose, we're getting these great opportunities to stack up against the best of the best. You can add in the cliche if you want. It's hard to beat a team twice, this, that, and the third. And that, hey, we're going to be the ones who are war ready, who are ready to go into the playoffs, having been in these major high leverage games against some of the best in the nation. Totally get that. From the Western perspective, we've seen on the offensive side of the ball, again, what your comment about their defense is absolutely correct. And again, I won't even push back if someone wants to claim that they have the best defensive secondary. I'm just not gonna. Because you add in as well just that piece on the way their offense puts them ahead on teams. Other teams kind of have to throw on them a bit more than perhaps teams have to against Ottawa. Again, the way you highlighted that teams can run the ball against Ottawa's defense, and you can't quite do that against this Western defense either. They're pretty good at football. Evan Hillock's having a hell of a year. Again, I go back to that game in McMaster, the 17-21, the 4 touchdowns. Obviously, for him, that was a meaningful game. The Evan Hillock homecoming, just such an Evan Hillocky game with the efficiency, the spreading the ball out, getting the ball into Robertson's hands, Jamal's hands, Missouri, Yazbek, Campanaro, Dolby, who's been having such an outstanding year. Fine, like the perfect example of a guy who's in that system about his third year, finally now having his breakout, sitting behind some of these big dogs in the backfield for them. And the creativity that they have, and yeah, obviously we've talked about that secondary for Windsor with Robert Springer just intercepting balls left, right, and center. Kaladi off the edge is going to be a huge matchup. Again, to sort of quote you, just ISOCAM. Eric Anderson versus Kaladia Moosin is just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Will we see any of those Western Mustangs return to that O line again? Just things to be wary of in terms of where this team's at, because they're functioning so effectively. And what I think is almost the most like what makes this version of Western almost more scary than times we've seen in the past. It was 2 years ago that they have the OUA MVP at running back and Keon Edwards. I mean, he's still on the team. Arguably, their best running back is Keanu Yazbek this year in terms of just the production. Hillock obviously has had a great year. And we've had so many great conversations this year about who has the best receiving core, of whether it's Laurier. Well, we do usually tip of the cap to Laurier at number 1, but then whether it's Western, whether it's Guelph, whether it's Carleton, whether it's McMaster, and Western's getting to this territory where and actually on the defensive side too, but I'll finish the thought on the offense, where for so long, it felt like Western's MO on offense and defense was we're really good at what we do, and we have some of the best players who are coached up by the best in the business. We don't need to be the most creative. We will just beat you in a straight fight. And that's frankly why I enjoyed playing Western more than McMaster. We've talked about Coach Knox's defenses a lot this year and a lot on this very podcast. He makes you think a lot. For so long, it felt like going up against Paul Gleason with that defense. Hey, look, it's a 4-3. They're just littered with OUA All-Stars and CISU Sports All-Stars, all Canadians. You got to deal with that. That's your challenge, and they're coached up as best as anyone, and they go up against the best in practice. And then offensively, what do we talk about? Power G offense. And they still do that so well. But we've started to see these play actions, these sweeps, these, as you dictated from, I think, the Queens game, where they're showing a jet look one way off the counter tray the other, and reading linebackers and having play actions to running backs who then are peeling off into a wheel route as then the receivers clear out the opposite side of the field, where Westerns, again, not to take away from the first-ranked team in the OUA in Laurier at all. They earn that. They deserve that. They are the best in the province right now. And not to take away from Guelph, not to take away from Windsor, Queens, these other teams at the top. But it feels like what we're starting to see from Western is now being like, so for so long, other teams had their shot at us because they would have to muddy up the water a little bit to, you're going to struggle to try and fight us the way we like to play. So they kind of muddy the waters a little bit. So you know what we're going to do now? We're going to be great at what we do in just the straight up fight, where we can just outmuscle you on both sides of the ball. But we're also going to get more creative too, because we're starting to see those 30 fronts come in. We're starting to see more of these blitz packages. The way that they're using Jude Buchanan in just firing him from all angles on that defense. Western, again, is just playing some really impressive football. It's a great opponent for them to go up in Windsor with the way that defense is and really test out some of these things they're doing. I'm just excited to keep watching all the creativity that they're bringing on top of just the raw excellence that the 12 players that they trot out for every single play bring to the table.
Yeah, when you think Western football, you think excellence, even if there might be some swear words in front of that word excellence because of how badly some of these Western Mustangs have beaten some of your teams. You have to think of excellence as they have been performing since day one here. When you look at this Western defense, they're number two in rush yards per game. They are number three in passing yards per game, sitting on 11 interceptions, which is tied for first in the OUA, five fumble recoveries, 16 sacks, and tied for first on touchdowns with three defensive touchdowns. So this defense is obviously playing some outstanding football. And once again, we've talked about it a little bit, but when you start talking about the outstanding play from a guy like an Evan Hillock, and that's what you just keep talking about week after week after week after week after week, it can get a little boring and we can almost start glossing over it because when you look at a Toronto game, it's like, oh yeah, he goes 18 for 26, 243 yards and three touchdowns. That's a standard Evan Hillock game. When you don't really, I feel like we're starting to lose some of the outstanding play or the appreciation for what this young man is doing with this offense here. And like you mentioned, the offense is starting to really now explode, and not just explode, but starting to branch out and just not going into, yeah, we're going to do a power G run game and that's all we're going to do. That's certainly still their bread and butter, don't get me wrong. But when you see a power G where you've got pulling guards going to the right and then the running back cuts back to the left away from the pulling guards. So now your entire defense is flowing one way with a running back going the opposite and ripping off a 30-yard game. And then you're looking as a defensive coordinator being like, well, you can't not go with the pulling guards because if you don't, then you're just going to get killed if they actually run it properly. But when you do that, you're completely out of position, and now you're relying on one-on-one blocks in certain areas to make plays, and that's what Western is relying on because they think, and they've proven, that we're better than you in one-on-one football. And that's really what they're really going to go into this. I mean, when you look at Evan Hillock and what he's been doing so far in this year, his numbers this year: 115 completions for 172 attempts, just around 67% completion, 1,759 passing yards, 17 touchdown passes to only four interceptions. This young man is the best in the OUA, and I'm fairly certain in all of U Sports, at finding guys in the end zone. He leads this category in touchdown passes, and he's been doing this year after year after year. Their completion percentage, their touchdown percentage is outstanding. Even when you start looking in the red zone, they are the number one team in the red zone in the OUA, sitting at 97% you are scoring points, and 71% of the time you're scoring touchdowns with that. This is a squad that knows how to score, that knows how to move the football, and this is really going to be the ultimate test for Windsor. However, when you really look at this, and I'm going to get into my pick into this one, you can finish up whatever thoughts that you have. Something that I thought was really interesting that I want to share. I went back as far back as I could with the tracks. Since 2006, these teams have played 20 times. In that time, Western is 20-0. The Windsor Lancers have not beaten them since at least before 2006, which is quite a ways away, potentially almost around 20 years of Western dominance here. We've talked about there's been a bunch of close games recently between these two squads, and Coach Cercelli is really bringing up the quality of that Windsor Lancer program for sure. But 20-0 turns to 21-0. I'm taking the Western Mustangs to win this game.
Yeah, you had me going there for a bit in the first half there. Yeah, you had me going a little bit. Yeah, no, that's startling. But you know, like that's no shot at Windsor. Hey, for any other fan of any other program or anyone on any other program, if you're chuckling at Windsor right there, go ahead and check your own team's records against the Western Mustangs. They're the literal Globo Gym Purple Cobras of the OUA. We're better than you, and we know it. Tom, you know, I do have a shirt under my sweater here, but I'm not doing a funky reveal like last time because I'm rocking blue collar gold swagger under our sweater. But I'm going Stangs all day on this one, man. Hey, they're so good right now that it's enjoyable to watch. Again, in the past, it's just frustrating watching them because they're just playing so physical and dominating that I feel like I have a greater appreciation for what they're doing right now. It's almost like a more beautiful type of football than I feel like we've seen them do before. But again, if they want to, they can still just punch you in the mouth. Again, it's a great test for both these clubs. Windsor, again, I want to see how healthy they are. I want to see who they're trying out a quarterback and how they finish up the season just philosophically. And I think they'll give a good fight. Undoubtedly, I think this is a strong matchup. It's always good with these two clubs duking out. Tom, we go to the final game of our OUA season. The 2024 regular season wraps up in the nation's capital where the Laurier Golden Hawks, the number one ranked Laurier Golden Hawks, that's both in the OUA and in the nation, take their talents to face the Carleton Ravens coming off the bye week on the back of falling in the Panda game in that just outstanding finish from TD Place 2 weeks ago to their arch rivals in the Ottawa GGs for Laurier. They come off the back of that really impressive win against Windsor last week. Final score on that one was, Laurier 33, Windsor 26. Our guy in Elgersma 21 for 29, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Nelms picks up 74. Tayshawn Jackson, soon to be offensive rookie of the year or rookie of the year writ large, however you want to frame it. This kid's been amazing. Picks up 55 as well. On the ground in that receiving core, as you highlighted it, should be first team All-Canadian in Ethan Jordan. Number 4, give me more. Ethan Jordan, Raiden Thorne, his partner in crime, picking up a touchdown. Spoke all those lovely things about Western. And in the process, I may have said that not me, but someone out there is saying that Western's still the best in the OUA. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, Galley. I'm looking at you, Falls. You guys are still number one. That offense is outstanding. That defense is special, and those special teams are so fantastic. Now you're going against the Carleton team now, though, who has everything to win. And we've already talked about this a little bit, have everything wrapped up. Nothing changes for Laurier. And you have another bye week coming up. So here's the question, Tom. You're Coach Falls, you're Coach Gall, you're all these guys in these rooms talking about how you go into this game. Is 2 weeks rest too much rest for an OUA team from the standpoint of if you say, look, nothing changes from this one. There's a hungry Carleton team out here that needs to win it, and they don't care if it's our number 1s, number 2s, or our number 5s, whomever that might be trotting out there. They're going out there to take our heads off because they know the only chance they have of making the playoffs comes with a win, and they will do that at whatever cost it takes. So why risk it? We've been a little banged up too. It's in the last week of the season, but you already have a bye coming up. How do you play it from that standpoint? Is it a function of get our guys in the first half and then we pull regardless just to pull them regardless to make sure they're getting some of those live reps so it's not a full 3 weeks if you think about it from the last time they played a real competitive game in Windsor last week now to then the second round of the playoffs? Or do you just say, hey, look, it's such a privilege and we've earned this right to have this extra rest. We take this rest and we just know that our guys being healthy is the number one thing that no one wants to deal with.
You bring up some really solid points in that when you break down that scenario. From my brief coaching stint, both in the OUA and certainly currently working with some of the Hamilton schools here, shout out to my guys in Saint Jean de Brebeuf. The number one thing that I have realized that is the most important when you are talking to your kids is to have consistency. When you say something in week 1 of the season and you have a certain mentality, you got to keep that same mentality as you roll out throughout the entirety of the season, because kids will really come to respect that. Kids will really make sure that they get behind a certain message and a mission. If you're changing things up by, we're going to go balls to the wall in this one, we're really going to do our thing, and then, hey, you know what, we're going to take it easy here, we're going to change up the game plan here. That doesn't always vibe with certain kids if they're really trying to get behind you. This squad for Laurier, trust their coaching staff, and everybody that I have spoken to, both player, coach, and fan, cannot say enough great things about who Coach Michael Falls is as a person, as a coach. I think the world of this Laurier coaching staff, Coach Michael Faulds, Coach Todd Galloway, Ron Van Worker, and everybody else associated with them. They are outstanding at what they do, but they have been teaching, they have been preaching this entire time. We are number one. Play Laurier football, play as hard as you possibly can. I think you come out with everybody. This is their starting offense, starting defense. The only time you don't see anybody is if they are injured and they have to take off. Now, if you're in a scenario going into this game where it's, you know what, 50-50 for sure, you rest. Even 60-40, 60 in favor of being able to go 40 not, I think you rest and you err on the side of that. But if you're good to go, you're good to go. We go out and we play Laurier football. You dominate in this one, and that's what you earn your bye week, certainly. But don't sit on a loss or sit on a performance that you're not real proud of going into the playoffs here. So I think you're going to see the starters trot out here, and I don't think you're really going to see them take the foot off the pedal unless this game is really in hand. I think you see the best that Laurier has.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there. And again, this is a man in Coach Faulds who has his team, regardless of how the season ends, practice in some form or fashion up until the Vanier Cup, just for that mentality of that's what our goal is, to be in that game. So we stay ready. We are prepared for that. It would seem antithetical to someone with that kind of philosophy to now take your foot off the gas. And I want to talk about Carleton in a second, but then there's also something that kind of occurred to me that would be fascinating because you were detailing so beautifully when we were talking about Western. I'm sorry, Lori, I know we're in your time now, and I'm bringing up Western again, but the year Evan Hillock's been having, and with Elgersma coming off the MVP, leading his team to first in the nation, first in the province, first round bye, all these things, 73% completion percentage, 2,100, just under 2,200 yards. Likely he can get that up to 2,500 if he plays a full game. The 16 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, though again, we said that gap was a little bit wider last year, but that's still a beautiful 2-to-1 ratio there. Hillock, 66, 67% completion percentage. He'll end up just around 2,000 yards, maybe a bit underneath, 17 touchdowns. He'll probably get over 20, 4 interceptions. Really strong year. And we've kind of said that just with how dominant Laurier's been playing, Laurier beats Western, that in a year where, again, other guys like Kasari, who gets injured, and Queens ends up kind of middle of the pack in terms of the playoff teams, a guy like Charles Aslan, who comes on so strong to begin with, a guy like Tristan Aboud, who it's like Tristan Aboud, Elijah Barnes, some guys to keep your eyes open for in years to come as far as possible candidates to win the MVP award. It just seems like, you know what? Hey, look, Helgersma, MVP last year. Your team by record arguably got better. We'll see what happens in this matchup here. You know what? Give it to the kid again. It's been 20 odd years since we have a back-to-back MVP. And I'm saying all that because it just came to mind, and you highlighting that whole piece on your philosophy and your messaging to the kids. If Helgersma played only 7 games and Hillock played all 8, and they end up with an equal record, let's say, if then Carleton picked up this win, that MVP decision becomes so tough to call in my eyes. Obviously, you can just say at the end of the day, hey, Laurier still beat Western, so let's just keep it simple. And frankly, no issue there. No issue there. Because again, at the end of the day, if you wanted to say Elgersma is the most valuable player in the league, it's usually a quarterback award. Shout out to Keelan Edwards from 2 years ago. Of course, and all the great running backs and non-quarterbacks who've won it. That's where that gets super interesting. Maybe we should put a pin in that conversation more broadly for after we're done. I don't know if you do you want to speak on that quickly? The prospect of, because again, I'm in line with you that Laurier is going to come out guns a blazing. They have that rest week, but then like in the version of the world we're living in where they just say, all right, you know what, Taylor, rest up that shoulder. You need this, that, and the third. You take a lot of hits. You give a lot of hits. Might that turn the tides of an MVP conversation?
Well, the other thing to really keep into perspective, let's say, Evan Hillock has played outstanding football throughout. I mean, in 2021, he came in halfway through the season for Jackson White and ended up winning the Vanier Cup and being the Vanier Cup MVP. I mean, this kid has been outstanding since he first got there. Has never won an OUA MVP, despite this year, and I believe last year, potentially even the year before as well, but for sure the last 2 years in leading the OUA in touchdown passes and being on one of the best offenses in the country here. If this game is close, if it's a close scenario, I think the edge goes to Evan because of all of those things. I really do. If Taylor wasn't going to play in this one and all of that, but I think Taylor's going to play. I think he's going to do some great things, and we'll leave the OUA pickers in order to make their decision, which we should be one of them. And I'm putting that out into the universe again. We should be involved in that, but certainly brings another area to this. But this is a Laurier game. We got to stop talking about Western during a Laurier segment.
Yeah, redirect it, please.
But when you look at this Laurier squad, certainly they're doing some outstanding things. But there is an area of they are going to continue on their same trajectory, their same path, and what has led them to be great throughout this entire season, most definitely. But you're playing a Carleton Ravens squad who is the cornered animal here, who has nowhere else. Your only hope for making the playoffs involves a number of things happening, but first and foremost is you winning this game. At some point in time, there's going to be something in the back of your heads that says, you know what? This game ultimately doesn't mean anything for Laurier in this one, other than obviously bragging rights, getting to say you had a perfect regular season and all that. But Carleton, if you lose this game, you're out. If you want to continue to play, and you and I have both said of all of the losing record teams, this is one of the greatest teams that we have seen with a losing record, at least in recent memory here. This is not a team to sleep on. This is not a team that you can say, you know what, we're not going to give you everything that we have. And I'm not saying that Laurier is going to take their foot off the gas. I just said I think they're going to keep their foot on the gas and do their thing. But all of these games, all of these moments are really boiled down to who wants this more. And at the end of the day, in the back of your heads, Carleton is thinking, if I don't make this play on every single play, we don't win this game. We don't win this game. We don't get into the playoffs. And I think there's a little bit of an extra edge to these Carleton Ravens that already have outstanding players like an Elijah Barnes, who's been playing some outstanding football, Kasim Ferdinand, unbelievable, Frederick Hatchie, Tristan Reddy. That's receiving corps playing lights out as it stands right now, with a resurgence of of a run game here with Matthew Morin and these guys. This isn't a Carleton Raven offense that I think really can surprise some folks. And in the best of scenarios, and now when you bring them into an area where you're the cornered animal here, there's only one option, and it's to win, or else your season is done. I think that gives a little bit of an extra edge to a Ravens squad.
I think it's 100%. I think that's a little bit of the swagger that I then levied into picking York in they're going to McMaster. And then the flip side here is that for Carleton, you're at home to begin with. Laurier's taken on the travel to head all the way the 7-8 hour drive, probably even a bit longer now I think about it, to get out to the nation's capital to face you. And you mentioned those offensive weapons, and even seeing the resurgence of a guy in Ethan Roca and Keyshawn Reed also doing great things in the return game. But of course, you got guys like Ottman Braun is a great returner. We're seeing our guy in Tristan Reddy is a great returner. They're really have so many ways of scoring the ball on you. And then defensively, a guy in Chris Tupin, who last I haven't checked in a while, one of the top tacklers in the league. Xavier Malone, Ottman Braun mentioning his name, but of course, Ife Onyeka on the front end, Schneider Cave Phillip, Jake Henderson, all these guys have been playing outstanding football on all aspects. Again, it's a situation where, in the same way that we talked about York and Mac cheering for U of T to beat Ottawa to then possibly give them a better bet, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't know if they really care, but like if you're Guelph, Western Windsor with those 2 through 4 seeds still kind of up for grabs depending on what happens. You know what? I think you're saying, hey, Laurier, just take care of business, all right? I don't want to see this Carleton Ravens team sneak into the playoffs. They are perhaps, again, out of those lower teams that might make the playoffs, as the way they've been playing. And shout out York. Love all the things you're doing. Shout out Mac. Shout out Ottawa. Obviously, the way the offense is coming along. If this Carleton team is able to sneak into the playoffs, and when we make our picks, we're going to go over the playoff scenarios again because it's more than just the win for them. It's to me, yeah, as you said, that cornered animal mentality. I think that carries with them. We saw the fight they gave Windsor last year, going all the way to the end of the 401 in a quarterfinal matchup, where they nearly knocked them out in the first round. Again, that defense was pretty much the same defense. Plus, our guy moved to Agelli and all these guys offensively. This was a Carleton team that, again, they've been growing. They were that much younger. So this is a team, and now Elijah has the experience of playing in a Panda game. So the high leverage aspect of getting into that quarterfinal game, even being in this game, like he's already got that. And again, that game in the Panda game, he goes 19 for 28, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and we're still seeing a few times in the year where sometimes his interceptions are coming at you can see a bit of that youth showing a little bit where he's maybe taking a gamble on something or trying to fit a ball into a tight window. And that's partly, I think, what makes him great. We've talked about that with Taylor Elgersma, where the fact that he takes these shots is what ends up in the grand scheme of things, even if he throws an interception here or there. And I've certainly told this to quarterbacks I've coached, show me a great quarterback who's never thrown an interception, and well, you won't find one, right? Because you need to take those opportunities. I love what this team is doing, and I don't know if we're at the point now to make our picks for all the reasons we've talked about. Partly the prospect that Laurier doesn't have, I say this with air quotes if you're not watching this, anything to play for in this one. And Carleton with their back against the wall. I'm not going to be surprised. I wouldn't be like, just behooved for Carleton to pick up this win. Frankly, I'd like to see it because I'd love to see them get into the playoffs. I've loved what this team has done all year long. And I guess I'll just ride on that point to say, but I've also already said I'm not doubting Laurier. And I think you made a great point in highlighting that they're not gonna I don't know. We don't think that they're gonna be coming in with anything other than, hey, we're here to play a football game. And when you're at this level of football, you only know one way to do that. Like you could play that whole game of like, yeah, but psychologically in the back of your mind, you still know that when you step on a football field, you have, it's Ricky Bobby. It's like you're first or last. You just have one speed. It's go. There's no other way to play the game of football. I expect nothing less from Laurier. And I think they'll pick up the win. I'm picking them to do so. But again, Carleton. I just love Carleton. I'd love to see them pick up the win to save the opportunity for them to get in the playoffs. I'm not going to bet on it happening though.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a neat little fun way to build out some suspense, but I'm going with Laurier in this one as well. I think that this squad has been playing some of their best football I've ever seen a Laurier squad play. But I do want to call out once again, we've been talking about it so much. We just mentioned some of the numbers that Taylor Elgersma and Evan Hillock has. Elijah Barnes this year, 124 completions for 196 attempts. That's 63% completion. 1,877 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. For this being your first year starting as a second-year quarterback and really getting thrown into the fire against some outstanding teams, this young man has played some outstanding football, and I think his future is very bright for the Ravens. I still think that Laurier takes the victory in this one, and unfortunately, we see a Carleton team that does not play to their capabilities, or at bare minimum, they don't win the games that we thought that they should in this one. So I am going with the Laurier Golden Hawks here, even though I would love to see Carleton in a scenario that gets into the playoffs.
Yeah, and again, I love that you added in some of what Elijah Barnes did this year. I don't know if I said it on the pod. I've certainly said it to you. I think I've said it to some other people. Elijah's a kid where, again, with the way the draft is and with some of the quarterbacks we have in the league, I'm expecting a lot of these guys to come back next year, and that's going to be so exciting. Like I think there's very good reason to think that Hillock, that Elgersma, that all these guys, that Keegan could be back, right? Which just makes for an exciting year to come. So maybe the year is not next year, but this is very much a kid with the way that this team's progressing right now. I could see being the best we have right now. Him and Tristan Aboud, I can see as in a year or two being the best in the biz. And you go back to Taylor Elgersma's first year as a starter in 22-23, as a full-time starter through 8 games. And again, this was a year where if you're Elijah, you came into this year thinking, I'm behind Tristan Lefebvre, and maybe he could have competed to win the spot, but it's if not for an injury, it might not have happened. In 2022-23, you were reading off those numbers for Elijah Barnes. This would have been fun to do as like a blind reveal. Taylor Elgersma throws 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Just under 1,800 yards himself, 66% passing percentage, third in the league. So, oh my God, geez Louise. Tom, in 2022, Evan Hillock threw 16 touchdowns and no interceptions. Holy cow, what the heck are we doing here? But again, just as a point of comparison in this game, Elijah versus Taylor, I kind of like that as the present versus possibly the future coming there. But nonetheless, we're both rolling with Laurier in this one. Tom, those are our last regular season picks for the 2024 season. We've talked about the playoff picture. I think we wanted to address it again quickly because as it was brought to our attention, there's the possibility that Ottawa falls out of the playoff picture. So I think we wanted to readdress that. And then going back to it was Brad McMillan. Shout out to you, Brad McMillan, in recognizing Windsor with the possibility of getting in a second. I realized that that's probably part of the exercise that you and I were doing before the pod that we're about to engage in again right now, where if Guelph, Western, and Windsor are all at 6-2, once you work your way through common opponents, it's not just that Guelph has the win over Windsor. Those 3 teams wouldn't have all played each other because for some reason Guelph and Western didn't play each other in the regular season. So now you have to look at common opponents between them. So I'm certain Mr. McMillan probably did his homework and recognized that common opponents, point differential, and everything like that probably leads to an opportunity where Windsor could end up in second if they beat Windsor. So yes, I guess Guelph could fall to 4th in this situation. However, let's leave that alone because it's more of the bottom of the playoff picture that we want to address. So as of the picks as we're predicting it, Laurier will finish up 8-0. Western will be 7-1. Guelph and Windsor will be 6-2. Guelph with the head-to-head will be 3rd. Windsor in 4th. Queens with the win will be
Windsor 5-3.
Windsor 5-3. Sorry, my apology. Sorry. Guelph firmly in 3rd at 6-2. Windsor at 5-3, tied with Queens, but with the head-to-head, they're in 4th. Queens at 5th. Ottawa at 4-4. Mac, that's where we differentiate. Me saying they go to 3-5, you saying they go to 4-4, and then the rest of it doesn't really matter all that much. However, in the possible universe that we live in which you and I are wrong in our picks, which doesn't happen often, but it has been known to happen, and in specific, I think the scenario we want to address is the one in which the U of T Blues triumph over the Ottawa GGs, dropping Ottawa to 3-5.
Oh.
Yeah, as Tom grunts. This is where things get kind of interesting. So I believe the scenario we want to look at is one in which Ottawa falls to U of T. Ottawa finishes 3-5. Mac falls to York, where Mac and then York would both be 3-5, and Carleton beats Laurier to also get themselves to 3-5. This creates an interesting situation where we can't do head-to-heads because Ottawa and Mac didn't play each other this year, correct? That was the one that we're missing. So head-to-heads go out the window when any number of the teams that are tied by record haven't played one another. The next stage, and just as a funny little glimpse behind how we think we know these things, I'm basing this off of an email that our friend and brother and Eddie Meredith received from Tom Flax in 2018, breaking down the possible playoff situations from that year, where the step-by-step process goes: most league wins, well, they would all be tied at 3-5. Record in the head-to-head, well, that's not going to apply because in this situation, Ottawa and Mac wouldn't have played each other. point difference in the head to head. Well, again, that doesn't matter because we're not talking about head to heads. Step 4 says record in games within the division. Well, golly, come on. Like, let's just get rid of that step. What are we even talking about? The 5th step is record in games against common opponents. So again, we're talking about York, Carleton, Mac, and Ottawa. Tom, who are the common opponents for those teams?
There's only one team that's common between all 4 of those, meaning that all 4 teams played this same one team, and that's Toronto. And so in this scenario, and I should say we're starting with the most complicated version of everything here just to get it out of the way. But in this scenario where all 4 teams, the main common opponent is Toronto, immediately Ottawa is eliminated because the rest of Carleton, McMaster, and York will all have wins against the Varsity Blues. So now Ottawa in this scenario now goes to the bottom of this list, having been eliminated from this. And the other thing that you pointed out to me when we were going through this is as you eliminate teams, you then restart the process. You don't evaluate everything on this. So as this happens, if Toronto is to beat Ottawa and everybody else is at 3-5, immediately, because the other 3 teams have beaten Toronto, Ottawa goes down to the bottom of the list, and that's the scenario where the Ottawa GGs would then finish in 9th here. Then you start looking at, you do the whole process all over again, and I can't remember how we worked everything out, but if Carleton finishes at 3-5 in this tiebreaker scenario, they then leapfrog to get into the playoffs here. Now, the only issue that can kind of come into play here is, once again, when you go into those head-to-heads, you get into, like you beautifully detailed, the snake kind of eating its own tail, where in this scenario, Mac will have beaten Carleton, Carleton will have beaten York, and York will have beaten Mac. So in that scenario, if we're doing things correctly, we're looking at a point differential between those wins. McMaster beat Carleton by 2 points, which, let's say, +2 for McMaster. Carleton beat York by 14, in a plus in that scenario. So in this scenario so far, Carleton is in the lead, which is why they get into the playoffs. If York were to beat McMaster by 1 singular point, there is a scenario where Mac would still get into the playoffs and get into with the point differential. However, I think it's more realistic to say that York will beat them by more than just a single point, although crazier things have certainly happened. If that's the case, then York would then leapfrog McMaster, and we would have Carleton and York in the playoffs with McMaster and Ottawa out of it. Now, the easiest scenario of everything that we've kind of said here is Ottawa wins and McMaster wins, and then those 2 teams are in the playoffs with Carleton and York being out of it. But when you get into these tiebreak scenarios in here, there's a lot of things that can come into play, and in most scenarios, there's a little caveat for how things work here. Certainly, the one thing that's pretty well consistent: if McMaster loses to York, chances are they're out of the playoffs. There is a scenario where if Ottawa wins and McMaster, York, and Carleton are all at 3-5, that there's some more stuff that could potentially happen in there. But for the most part, Mac, win and you're in. But if you lose to York, unless you have some outstanding luck going into this as well, you're out of the playoffs, and York will get in here. So lots of crazy scenarios, especially the most crazy is if we have a 4-way tie at 3-5. That's where a lot of things can certainly happen here. But for the most part, Carleton certainly needs a lot of extra help, and York needs a little bit, but McMaster and Ottawa win, and you are in.
Let's just keep it that simple, Tom. Again, like we said, and shout out to Brad McMillan for pointing it out to us in the top half of the OUA playoff picture that things can still get shuffled around. We really wanted to touch on that because, again, we did not think it possible that Ottawa could fall out of the picture. But if you're a betting individual, I wouldn't put too much on it to happen because, yeah, as you said, a lot of moving parts to make that happen. But again, shout out to Mr. McMillan. Shout out to, again, the individual whose name we're forgetting. I think they have a username that's not a name on their YouTube feed, but for commenting on that and just staying engaged to keep us honest in terms of the comments that we're making so we can reevaluate what we think is the case with all these situations. Tom, here we are at the end of our Week 9 preview podcast. We're going to Hamilton to check out this game. We did a beautiful job in my eyes of looking at these games. It's a pleasure as always. What are your final thoughts on our last preview podcast of the regular season for 2024 in the OUA?
Well, my first immediate response is say it ain't so, because I want to continue to talk about OUA football. And now, obviously, we're going to have an outstanding playoff scenario, which is going to arguably give us our most exciting games of the season, which seems insane to me with considering all of the outstanding games that we've had so far, but it's only going to get better and better. So what's the saying? How does the old saying go? Don't be
cry
sad
because it's over. Smile because it happened.
That's it. That's 100% it. Be so grateful and so happy that we've got such outstanding football in our own backyard here, and it's only going to get better when the playoffs come.
Amen, brother. Well, it's always a pleasure breaking it all down, setting it all up with you. I'm certainly grateful for that. And again, to everyone tuning in and who we know is going to be there in the stands at Ron Joyce, look for Tom and the guy in the Lions costume. I'm only partly joking because I haven't gone yet, but there's still time, folks. There's still time. Send me that costume, or maybe I'll have to go and take it from the person wearing it at the York and McMaster game. Whichever way you break it down, if you're at Ron Joyce, come say what's up. However you're tuning into OUA games this weekend, enjoy it. Flip through all the games because there are things to take in all these matchups. And if you don't believe me, rewind about 2 hours ago and we'll break it all down for you again. And if we don't see you on the weekend, we'll be here breaking down Week 9 for you right here at the 55.